Good afternoon, everyone. We will begin in just 1 minute. Okay. Welcome to Access Art in America's Memorials, an update on accessibility at the FDR Memorial. Today's event is hosted by the FDR Memorial Legacy Committee. My name is Kelly Douglas. I'm a white female with long blonde hair and glasses, and I'm wearing a black shirt. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the communications director for the FDR Memorial Legacy Committee, and I will serve as today's technical support. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping tips. We do have an ASL interpreter on today's call. Thank you, Cheryl. We are presenting in gallery view, so the interpreter should always be visible. You do not need to pin them. However, if you'd like to, you're welcome to. Captions are available in Zoom. Click Show Subtitle in your Zoom menu bar to turn them on. We will be sharing a few visual slides that will all have verbal descriptions. You do not need to be on Zoom to access the event. We will read all questions out loud so that the content will be available to individuals calling in on the phone or those who cannot see visual content. The call is being recorded and will be posted to our website for future use. At the end of the session, we will have a Q&A portion as part of our discussion. You can submit your questions in the Q&A tab located at the bottom of your menu bar. You can email them to me at kelly@fdrmemoriallegacy.com. I will put that email in the chat box. And you can also press *9 if you are dialing into the call, and it will notify me you have a question. We do ask that you please reserve this option as an accommodation for people who need it. Now that we've covered all those important points, we can get started with our program. It is my pleasure to introduce Mary Dolan, co-founder and executive director of the FDR Memorial Legacy Committee.
Hello, everyone. Let's see, hopefully I'm on the screen. Kelly, you see me? Am I there?
We can see. Go ahead.
Okay, good. All right. Sorry, everyone. Just it's only been 2 years into everybody using Zoom, right? So we're still learning. So, hey, everyone, I'm Mary Dolan. I'm co-founder and executive director of the FDR Memorial Legacy Committee. I'm a white woman with blondish shoulder length hair, and I'm wearing a blue shirt, and I use she and her. The FDR Committee was co-founded in 2019 by myself, Jane DeLand, and Jim Dixon. It is the citizen-led organization with the mission to promote education about the FDR Memorial in Washington, D.C., to improve inclusion and accessibility so all visitors can experience the memorial, and to preserve the memorial for future generations. The organization is born out of the successful disability-led campaign in the 1990s for disability representation at the memorial, and we're committed to sharing the diverse perspectives of the Roosevelt era and that era's legacy today. I'm very proud of what we are about to present to you today, and I'm thrilled to introduce to you our moderator. For those of you who are from the Washington, D.C. area, her voice is one that you have known for years. Kristi King, WTOP. She's been keeping Washingtonians up to date on the news for 3 decades. She's also a committed disability ally and volunteer, and we thank you for being with us today and for your service and allyship. And I'll turn it to you, Kristi.
Hi there, I'm Kristi. I'm a white woman in front of a screen that shows the beautiful tidal basin, cherry blossoms, full bloom, light reflecting off the water. I identify as Kristi Sue, Tata, Sita, King, Lilliston, but you can call me Kristi. And I have been a reporter at WTOP since 1990. And it's sincerely my pleasure to be part of this event. Now, issues of inclusion and accessibility are important to me. As a youngster, the language I elected to take in high school was American Sign Language. As a teenager in St. Augustine, Florida, I drove past the Florida School for the Deaf and Blind daily. And along with seeing the students in town, I found occasion to be on campus where I was immersed in a culture different from my own. Time spent on campus helped me distinguish and gain appreciation for the difference between the label disabled, someone with disabilities, and simply just being different. It fascinated me watching kids in a crowded gymnasium echoing with raucous, cacophonous cheers, the drums banging, you could hear echoing in your chest during a sporting event. And they could communicate across the basketball court, across the whole room using sign language, or behind closed doors and offices. People could communicate through glass walls with others in the hallway. Now, more recently, I've been a volunteer reader with Metropolitan Washington Year for 25 years. Wash Year is a reading service for the blind, visually impaired, and people who are physically unable to effectively read print. Maybe they can't hold it or turn the pages. So initially, I wanted to do the audio descriptions for the headset monitors that are provided at events such as plays and the ballet. My mom used to take us to see the Nutcracker every Christmas. And I wanted to share that experience of being able to see the strength and the grace of the ballerinas and the stage directions of in a play. Are they moving across? Are they reaching for the vase of flowers, you know? But audio description training, we got to get it right, guys. It takes a 2-day commitment over a weekend, and I was working weekends. So my first role at Washington Ear initially was to record an hour-long program every week, and I'd go through the filing cabinets to select stories from the region's Black newspapers, which then called the Afro-American, for example, and the Washington Informer. So that was yet another lesson for me about inclusivity. So yes, it is my pleasure sincerely to be here today. And I'm honored to be here among the illustrious members of today's panel. We have Stephen Graham, the president of the Robert Graham Studio, Dr. Cheryl Fogle-Hatch, the founder of MuseumSenses, and Glenn Klaus of the National Park Service. He's the visual information specialist for National Mall and Memorial Parks, which is our region's memorials and grounds, et cetera. So they're here to talk about the FDR Memorial specifically that just celebrated its 25th anniversary in May. Now, like many memorials, it has some issues that have prompted concern and discussion. Since its opening, there have been questions about accessibility. In May 2021, the FDR Memorial Legacy Committee, hosting us today, they commissioned a report by Dr. Fogle-Hatch to document those concerns. And since then, boom, there have been improvements at the memorial. So here today to talk about the art and the access issues and how to continue to improve inclusion for all of our nation's memorials. Let's start with Stephen. So Stephen, you worked alongside your father, the great American sculptor and artist Robert Graham, and have firsthand knowledge of his intent with the artwork he created for the memorial. So while his work is not the only subject of Cheryl's report, it's a starting point. We can start there to understand some of the access issues and some misunderstandings about the art and the intent. So take it away, Stephen.
Okay, thank you, Kristi. My name is Stephen Graham. I am son of the sculptor Robert Graham and passed away in 2008. I operate the Robert Graham Studio and had worked alongside of my father most of my career after college and grew up in the art world. I have well, first of all, I'm a white Hispanic male wearing a blue shirt. I have salt and pepper hair and FDR Memorial Legacy Committee screensaver behind me with the wheelchair sculpture that my father created. I have a unique perspective of this project growing up in it. And not only did it consume most of my childhood, I was also part of the creation and fabrication and installation. So it's got multi-layers for me, not only emotionally, but physically worked on the piece and the memorial itself. So my perspective is really about the art and its intent. So I guess basically it started in 1974 when Lawrence Halprin, who was the architect of the entire memorial, had the commission to do the memorial for FDR. And the selection of other artists included my father, Robert Graham, to be part of this unique memorial, being a series of outdoor rooms. And they were fashioned to be experienced with water, stone, sculpture, all the elements of nature. There was a plan that left it very undirectional, so you could experience the memorial any way you wanted to, and front to back to front, certain rooms. So there was no linear direction for this memorial to experience, which was really quite fascinating. And I had been part of that planning since 1974, since the memorial wasn't actually dedicated until 1997. That's a long span of my life. And I remember, when I was quite young, Lawrence Halprin and my father, late night, arguments and creative discussions about how this memorial was going to look and what was going to happen. So it went through several years of creative transformation. And in 2001, the wheelchair sculpture was dedicated and added to the memorial after 1997 initial dedication. So again, my main focus is really what the art represents and what it consists of, and my emotional and physical involvement with it. So, thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. So Cheryl, can you talk about your findings when you documented the report? You noted the spacing and the scale of those works of art.
Sure. My very first visit to the FDR Memorial was in the spring of 2021. At that time, Mary had asked me to go basically take a look at it and give them all of my thoughts. And in a burst of restraint, now that I know her, she didn't tell me about some of the long-standing comments about the Braille exactly. So my intent was to visit that as a first-time visitor would in 2021, as most people do. And if you come up to the quote in the prologue room, and Kelly, when you get a chance, if you can pop that picture on the screen. But anyway, I think you're okay. So to say that, to explore that quote, the letters are spaced apart. To the Braille letters are directly under the print letters, and they're spaced apart. And it is recognizable as Braille letters, but the scale of the memorial, because the walls and everything are so large, the scale is large. And I could read that quote by touch, though it was slow because of the scale. And you can take a minute, Kelly, and describe that.
Yes, the photo on the left is of the statue of FDR in his wheelchair. And then the photo on the right is a picture of Cheryl reaching out with her left hand to read the Braille located on the Eleanor quote behind the wheelchair statue.
And just to clarify, if no one's been there, the quote is vertically on the wall, a few feet from the wheelchair statue, just to give a sense of scale there. So there's three major occurrences of Braille in the memorial that can be touched. There's the quote on the prologue room, and then there's the columns and the mural in the room 2 with the Depression era programs. And if you can, when you get a chance, pop that photo up, Kelly, I'll talk for a minute. And
Sure.
yeah.
Sorry. I have it on the screen now, Cheryl. I'll just, the photo on the screen now is Cheryl pictured with her left hand touching one of the columns with the negative images as she.
Mhm. So the columns, and I'll get to some of this in a bit, but my first impressions in 2021 of the columns is, well, let's go from most to least recognizable for Braille. So most recognizable, I said in my report, was the quote on the prologue room. Second most recognizable was the quote were the letters on the mural. So the letters individually are recognizable, but the scale is shifted, the spacing is shifted, it's larger, it's not straight across, it's kind of abstract, and that's okay. But then we come to the columns on the screen and the negative impressions of the Braille that felt like holes in the stone. And I did not at the time understand the intent. We'll come to that as I've gotten to know Stephen. I've learned more about that. But the columns represent a printing press, and the mural represents the printed out product of the printing press. So, but in 2021, there was no information at the park in a form I could access that explained that. That has been updated, and we'll talk more about that. But those are my, that was my impression of the Braille in 2021.
Are we ready to move on to Glenn? So now to
Sure.
Glenn. Cheryl went back to the FDR Memorial in May this year, a couple months ago. Describe to us the improvements that were made, what she encountered that's new and different and better and improved, new and improved. You're muted, Glenn.
I'm sorry about that. Yeah, this is Glenn Klaus, and I work for the National Mall Memorial Parks. I'll describe myself. I'm a white male, dark hair on my head, and I've got a nice gray beard on my chin. And I'm wearing a Park Service gray shirt with a gold-colored badge and name tag. So what I'd like to do is maybe go back a little bit into the design process. It was great to see the report from Cheryl and the Legacy Committee. It jibed with the report we had done several years before that, but it's the thing that we never got around to. So I welcome the pressure to improve this memorial, especially the FDR, because it is such a touchstone for a lot of people with disabilities. If we could put up the slides. So the first slide here is basically what to do about exhibits at the memorial. And this illustrates a first thought about what we wanted to do. So to take back a little bit, within the memorial, there's a small building that has restrooms and a bookstore and a small amount of exhibits. And that was the sum total of the what we call interpretive media on site. It was not well lit. It was exclusively visual, and it was in a building that was locked at night. So while the memorial is open 24 hours a day, the interpretation was not. So our first idea was to basically bring the exhibits outside. So the slide that's up right now is a stylized plan view of the memorial with the curvy shore of the tidal basin at the top. And throughout the memorial plan are 7 circles with numbers on them, 1 through 7. And above 5 of the circles, I have photos, which represent our initial thinking about which features we wanted to highlight. And they include, from left to right, the statue of FDR in his wheelchair, the presidential seal, the bread line, it's 5 figures standing in a line, the statue of FDR seated with his navy cape and his little Scottish Terrier Fogle at his feet. And finally, at the far right is a statue of Eleanor Roosevelt standing. Next slide, please. Or the second step after deciding which features to represent was to do 3-dimensional scans of them. So we ended up having a company called SciArt come out and do scans. So the picture that's up now are side-by-side pictures of two of the elements, one of FDR in his wheelchair, and the view is looking at it at the back of President Roosevelt. And then the other photo to the right is of Fala. And one thing to note about the image of Roosevelt is that at the bottom of his wheelchair is a flat panel, and it has a etched drawing of the wheelchair itself, something that most visitors don't pick up on, but we'll highlight in a slide in a minute here. Next slide, please. And after that, we were able to take those 3D scans, and our fabricator company called Colorad was able to clean up the scans and then actually do 3D prints of the memorial. So we've got little scale models of 3 of them shown in this slide. One of them is of Roosevelt and Fala. The other one is of Roosevelt in his wheelchair. And the third is the bas relief showing President Roosevelt's funeral cortege. These then went to a bronze foundry where they had to be destroyed to make the bronze model, sadly, so we couldn't keep those. But what we ended up with were miniature versions of the statues that had a lot of the detail from the original pieces. So we're very true to the artist's intent. Next slide, please. And now this slide is a couple images of the actual finished exhibits. There's 2 images left to right. The one on the left shows the building that I described, the entrance to the building. It's got 2 glass double doors, and on the right side are 2 windows. And we have put a film over top of the windows that is basically a montage of enlargements of memorial features, interspersed with black and white photos of President Roosevelt and the words exhibit and park store. This was done to basically let people know that there was something in this building. Previously, it was just not a very welcoming impression at that facade. And the other image to the right is the first thing you see when you open the doors, which is a floor-to-ceiling stone plaque, which is has a bunch of writing on it that talks all about the dedication of the memorial in 1997. And below that is a platform with a replica of FDR's wheelchair, along with a graphic panel with the title, What's Missing? And this is where we introduce the idea of basically bringing a critical eye to monuments and memorials, and to understand who gets a memorial, what is represented in a memorial, and basically who gets to make those decisions. Next slide, please. 2 more images of the inside of the exhibit building, and they show that same motif that was seen outside, the collage of monument enlargements, details, along with photos on the left side. On the right side, we see from right to left, a large photograph of President Roosevelt sitting in his yacht, waving at us, a great photo. And there's a sign on top of that photo that talks about the theme of water throughout the memorial. To the left of that is a wall with a bird's eye view. It's a watercolor painting of the memorial, a timeline, as well as some high contrast labels that identify the 5 rooms of the memorial. And then finally at the bottom is a counter with a series of tactile models that are or tactile features. From right to left are a Braille book that is a translation of all the text in the exhibit. Then we have a tactile model of the memorial, 2 tactile models of the previous designs for the memorial done in the 1960s that were subsequently rejected. And then we have the 2 statues or reproductions of the statues of President Roosevelt to show the comparison of the original one done in 1997 versus the one of FDR in his wheelchair in 2001. Next slide, please. Now we go outside into the memorial, and I have 3 photos of what we call waysides in the National Park Service. These are essentially signs that are, their job is to caption the landscape. And in these 3 photos that are arranged left to right, the waysides are made up of a black frame as well as, sorry, and then they have a almost like a table-like surface, but one portion is angled with text and images, and then there's a flat portion with tactile models on the right side. And at the far right, embedded in the black frame is a audio unit. It's a silver plate with a series of holes arranged in a circle and a circular button underneath. So I'll look at these one by one from left, or let's go from right to left. So on the right is the wayside in the prologue room. And you can see the statue of FDR in his wheelchair in the distance, but then the wayside itself, it contains a basically a sign that talks about the content of the room. It's got a translation in Braille of, standard size Braille of Eleanor Roosevelt's quote behind FDR. And then it has a blow up of that etched drawing of the wheelchair that's done in a tactile method, so you can explore it with your fingertips. And finally, a reproduction of the statue of FDR on the right. In the center, we have a bronze model of one of the series of tumbled stones that's in the 3rd room that depicts or explores World War II and FDR's leadership during that time. You might notice that from the first slide versus this one, this is a element that we did not include initially, but after talking with some accessibility consultants, we determined that showing all the different symbolism of the memorial was important and not simply sticking to the bronze statues. So in this case, we show the stones that indicate a world turned upside down and riven by war during World War II. And then finally, on the left side, we have another wayside that is of FDR with Fala. And on all the waysides inside of the memorial, we take every quote that's carved into the stone and present them in a printed fashion as well as with Braille. And I believe that is the last slide I've got.
Thank you, Glenn. Cheryl and Stephen, you've seen these improvements, the adjustments. So what were your reaction to the waysides, your experience with them? Cheryl, I don't know, would you care to begin, or Stephen as the artistic angle?
Hi, Kristi. I can't seem to undo my video.
Yeah.
Kelly, can you?
She can
I
turn
can
you
address
off,
that.
but not on.
Exactly. So anyway, we have some audio. Let's see. Is that good? There we go.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Kristi. Yes, thank you, Glenn, and also Cheryl. I really enjoyed the presentation you just shared, Glenn. And Kristi, yes, I think before I answer that question, I would like to possibly just go into a little bit more of intent with overall. I know the Braille has been a focus and accessibility, but I think that initially the intent of the overall memorial was to include as many senses as possible. And I know that having the wheelchair sculpture was such a controversy that took several years and several people's hard work to get this actually to fruition. I experienced a lot of that controversy firsthand. And I think that controversy in art is a success. I think that if you have a discussion or an opinion, good or bad, it's creating conversation, it's creating thought, it's creating inclusive interaction, and it's bringing up questions. To me, I think that's a successful public artwork, one that actually evokes an emotion. So going on to the Waysides, I think that they're fantastic. It's a great addition. I went back recently to the 25th anniversary, and seeing the Waysides really excited me, because what Cheryl was saying was very true and valid, and you know, we've had several conversations since her initial report, and it's been really wonderful to get to know her and can see the perspective that she's talking about in the report. And one of the elements that wasn't really described until the Waysides appeared was the Braille in a more artistic sense, that the scale of the Braille and the spacing of the Braille really had several layers to it. So yes, as a Braille character, it's not conventionally spaced or sized. And that was really helpful in the Wayside, where the Eleanor Roosevelt quote is actually in true size, in true Braille scale, to tactile, to actually read. The actual quote on the wall in bronze is more of a tactile experience to include everyone. And when I mean everyone, it has elements of the large Braille, and then elements of the, there you go, thank you, Kelly, elements, the large letters. And if you look closely, you can see that the Braille character is directly below the letter. So it's really more of a, also of a mapping of what Braille language looks like. So for the sighted, it's an education in Braille. If you want to see what a T looks like, and an O. And I know that Braille has characters that go together for sentences, and it doesn't necessarily work in characters like this. But this was really kind of an artistic blending of a tactile experience of this beautiful quote that really was the essence of this bronze casting, and really the power of Eleanor Roosevelt's words, you know, brought out into this artwork that made people think, and it made people experience it, and it made people uncomfortable. It made people explore it, and all those things, I know to me, and I know to my father, are successful elements in an artwork. And I know that since it wasn't conventional, adding the Wayside has been fantastic, because you can always have you know, elaborate on the story, and all the elements that Glenn was talking about are now actually explained, and it's not such a mystery of why things happened or what other people were thinking about. You can really experience it yourself now with the Waysides. So I really enjoy the Waysides, and I think that they're a great addition, and they are thoughtfully placed, and I don't think they're getting in the way of any of the original intent architecturally or artistically or visually.
So let's move on now to Cheryl. Your impressions when you went back and you experienced the waysides, how did it enrich your experience for the overall effect of the memorial? What were your impressions, Cheryl?
Sure. I hope I'm clear now. I can't start my video either, Kelly.
I apologize. I just sent you a request that should, there you go. Now your video's on.
Okay, and you can hear me. Okay. I really enjoyed the waysides. I'm gonna backtrack a little because something Stephen said reminded me. I did enjoy the artwork in 2021 when I went. There's some elements that are life-size, tactile, you know, the statues, the wheelchair statue, the breadline sculptures. There was a lot of good stuff. I had comments about the artistic braille, but there was a lot of good stuff in the memorial. And then moving forward to 2022 and seeing the waysides, I was very pleased with them. Particularly the wayside that was about the Depression era programs, right next to the columns and the mural. If you feel like putting that up again, Kelly, you can. The reason, I mean, that was foundational because the audio description, if you press the button in the speaker, it goes through in synthesized a description of what is near the wayside, what feature in the memorial is near the wayside. And that presentation gave the columns as the printing press and the mural as the product of the printing press. And that the fact that all the print and braille on the columns are negative and on the mural are positive. And I understood it. I didn't have that information in 2021. I have the privilege of knowing Stephen Graham and being able to ask him, hey, did they get this right? Am I understanding this right? And so I spent a good chunk of my 2022 report describing information I had from Stephen about the art and my experiences with the art, and just trying to lay out for the Park Service and the public how they could explain these features. There's been some media coverage on and off over the years about it, and I'm trying to give everyone else the benefit who doesn't know Stephen of understanding what's going on. And also I'm very glad that the descriptions do explain that printing press and mural. I enjoyed, a lot of the others. The model of the stone was helpful. I mean, I kind of knew there were fountains and there were stones around because I had read up on the website and the materials that the Park Service had provided before, but it's much more concrete to have that right in front of you at your fingertips. And the funeral cortege, same, at small enough scale that I could feel it, and some of the other things. So I am very pleased with those waysides. I did make comments in my reports about improvements, but that's logistics. The big step is that the explanations are out there now for the public to get their hands on.
So big picture, guys, let's try to give an umbrella headline to this. We're at a better place now. I mean, but what have we learned? How do we make sure that memorials and cultural sites are inclusive and accessible from the very beginning? I mean, should there be a rule book for best practices? What have we learned from the FDR experience? I don't know, maybe we should start with Glenn, because you've got such an intimate role in helping translate all this. Right.
And I've given this some thought, and it's tricky. It's tricky developing memorials in Washington, D.C. It's a long process. It involves multiple federal agencies. And accessibility sadly gets lost by and large. But I think the good news is creating something like we did at the FDR Memorial basically acts as a guideline to some degree. I mean, it's the first time that we've brought accessible content directly into a memorial. And the fact that it is in Washington, D.C., in the neighborhood of Congress and the president, as well as, seen by our over 30 million visitors per year, I think it starts to set a benchmark of what visitors should expect at memorials. And hopefully, it creates, more advocates, or at least the expectation of what you would need at a memorial so that everybody can enjoy it. I also thought about, I've been trying to bring accessible content to the public since I joined the Park Service 12 years ago. And one of the things I always think of is that it's a really an evangelistic kind of endeavor, that we need to build critical mass, basically, amongst the disability community and advocates, allies, in order to just keep pushing for it. So we have actually had some successes here at the mall. Our last 3 memorials or memorial elements that have been dedicated in the last 5 years include the Eisenhower Memorial, the World War I Memorial, and the addition of a wall of names at the Korean War Veterans Memorial. Each one of those has an accessible content associated with it. So I feel like we're kind of getting, maybe not ahead of the curve, but we're on the curve in terms of when we develop memorials, we simultaneously develop accessible content.
Stephen, let me ask you this. You talked about arts being a stepping stone, an opportunity for discussion and debate and conversations. And do you think that artists will embrace the idea that there may be a role of fulfilling an obligation to accessibility for disabilities when they're creating a commissioned piece of work?
Thank you, Kristi. I'm still waiting for the video. Oh, here we go. Okay. I can't speak for all. I can speak for the experience that I lived through with my father. And when the controversy started regarding adding the prologue room with the wheelchair sculpture right behind me, this started a conversation that had many elements in it already that were accessibility focused. Glenn went over a few of them. The tactile drawing in the back of the wheelchair, was specifically cast in there as a raised bas relief to experience with touch. Unfortunately, after a couple of years and the artists had passed, those kind of signals to go look at something and touch something had disappeared, and the waysides are now, like Cheryl said and Glenn said, that the waysides are giving that information to people without having to be confused or misled by maybe a couple articles that they've read in the paper or in the media, and that there's an explanation on site while you're experiencing that artwork. And yes, I think that it's something that my father dealt with while he was designing this, because the wheelchair sculpture itself is actually placed away from the back wall purposely so that there is accessibility around it 360 degrees. Now, there were a lot of issues that were just site specific at the time. You couldn't solve everything at once. I think that the prologue room being on that end had some other accessibility issues at the entrance and other things that they were trying to figure out and trying to make the best of. But that really honestly didn't involve my father. What my father was really concentrating on was that sculpture and how to make that accessible. So yes, it was something that was part of the creative ethos of that sculpture in the memorial.
Thank you. I think Kelly is now going to take over.
Okay, thank you, everyone. That was fantastic. Steve, thank you so much for your wonderful moderating skills. Great questions we've already started out with. But now we're going to move into the Q&A section. So please, if you have specific questions, enter those. I dropped in the chat the different ways in which you can enter those through the Q&A, by email, raising your hand, or *9. But I did receive one question that we'll go ahead and start with. And this is probably more towards, well, it can be for anybody, but potentially Glenn and then Cheryl, your opinion. What does the future of inclusive and accessible cultural site design look like? Now that we know what we know, what's the next memorial look like?
That's a tricky question. Honestly, I feel like it's a matter of, like I mentioned, that places like the FDR Memorial, become somewhat of a benchmark. And my personal goal and philosophy is that you're never done with accessibility. I feel like we're still in the infancy of providing accessible content to places like exhibits and memorials. So we're still learning, absolutely. And what my position is that, we take the work we did at FDR, and then for the next memorial, which is probably the Desert Shield Memorial here at the mall, and take the lessons learned from FDR and then improve upon them. There are also some things that I didn't mention in the slides because they're not quite there yet, but we do have audio description directly on the waysides, but providing audio description in a number of formats is also important. So we do have plans to install infrared beacons at the wayside location. So then visitors can use their own devices to get that content, rather than to be forced, number one, to be in a specific location, as well as to be forced to have to listen to something at a certain speed. I know that people who are blind or have low vision may prefer to have a sped up audio track rather than something that feels slower. So those are a couple things. But yeah, I mean, I think multiple formats are always good because there's no one size fits all within accessibility. Everybody's different, and it's really up to us, those of us who are responsible for these places, to provide a full spectrum of methods to access the information.
Thank you, Glenn. Cheryl, would you like to comment on that? And in particular, what is the expectation of the disability community when visiting a museum or cultural site, and how we work then together with individuals like Glenn, to make sure those exist?
Well, I'll say that there are a lot of good people in museums and working at cultural sites, and they're doing the best they can. But at the highest level, when something new is being built and designed, you need to put accessibility in the specs, in the request for proposal, in the project planning phases, any of those kinds of things. When I talk with artists, sometimes, getting back to Stephen's comment about art and artists, sometimes it's just a question of, have you thought of this painting? Just add some extra thick lines to raise the drawing away from the canvas. Sometimes it's techniques, and people who are trained as visual artists don't always know. So sometimes it's education, but it needs to be all sorts of, there need to be examples like the FDR Memorial and other projects. There need to be requirements, funding, legal, project planning. And on the third piece of it, a visitor to a site needs to ask, what is available? Because there's so many sites and museums where nothing's available, and there's a expect a low bar. There's an expectation in the community that something won't be accessible because we've had the experience that many things aren't. So it is a work in progress. There is that evangelism piece that Glenn mentioned, and it's a whole number of factors building towards an environment where accessibility is expected. So that's my short answer for a lot of complicated stuff.
Thank you, Cheryl. Glenn, I saw you raised your hand.
Yeah, as Cheryl was talking, I was reminded of something here, and I wanted to give kudos to Mary and the Legacy Committee because their pressure is partially responsible for doing what we did when we did. So, in the words of Frederick Douglass, agitate, agitate, agitate. I think that kind of activism activism basically, can get results too. I mean, I think we should always be doing the right thing, but it's helpful to get a push once in a while.
I can feel the positive energy coming from Mary right now, although she's not on the screen. So thank you for that, Glenn. One more question I have for you, Stephen. You went in a great description on the purpose behind the Eleanor quote. Would you be able to provide a similar description about the intent of the social programs work?
Thank you, Kelly. Yes, I'd just like to kind of echo what both Glenn and Cheryl were saying, and I think that a large part of the improvements to accessibility is in planning, and we're dealing with so many landmarks, museums and galleries and memorials that are already built, and they've been built for several decades, and retrofitting those are difficult. It's slow, and I really appreciate what Glenn is talking about and what they're doing, because it is going back and dealing with what you've got and not putting it into the planning like Cheryl was talking about, where it's a lot easier. Also, technology today has really opened up the options for accessibility. I think that the waysides are an excellent example of the technology that we didn't have, in '97. So it wasn't even something we could have included if we wanted to, because the technology wasn't there yet. And going into the social programs, again, it's a conversation, and it's an emotion through tactile experience. The columns and the walls were images of the social programs and life during FDR's presidency that tried. I know that the intent in that room was very involved, and maybe you could put that photo of my father overlooking. There you go. Thank you. This says it all. I mean, his involvement with Lawrence Halprin, excuse me, was paramount, and the water is such a huge element in this room, and visually, tactfully, and these columns and the walls were meant to be touched, and they were meant to be experienced. The Braille, like Cheryl was commenting on this, sometimes it's again too big or too high. It was meant to sort of have that same experience as the visuals on there, where they're very they're snippets. They're like little remembrances. They're snapshots in time. They're this kind of parts to a whole, and I think that that's what that whole room represents, you know, and all of those elements being parts of a whole. Starting that conversation, you know, and again, you've got an artwork, you know, the danger of having a public artwork go up and nobody wants to look at it or nobody wants to experience it, maybe it's not so good. But I think that if you're engaging in conversation, engaging in controversy, engaging in opinion, if it evokes emotion, good, bad, indifferent, with love, it's a success. And public sculpture is belongs to the people. And once that artist's intent is presented, it's gone. It's not theirs. It belongs to the people. So the fact that we're discussing this 30, 40 years, 25 years later, 30 years later for this, I think is a success. And I love the idea that we're continuing to make it better. And thanks to Mary Dolan, who has really sparked the conversation of improvement. And I am happy and honored to be working with her. So I just think that it's a beautiful stepping stone. Like Glenn was saying, it's a benchmark, and I think that while maybe it's a work in progress, it's still something to use as an example and for what's to come. And hopefully the next memorials and next public buildings are using FDR Memorial as an example to you know, to help include and fold that accessibility in from the beginning.
Thank you so much, Stephen. That is a wonderful photo, black and white photo of your father sitting, looking over the memorial and the waterfall with the columns. It's very moving. At this time, I would like to turn it over to Mary Dolan to close us out. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Stephen, Glenn, Dr. Cheryl Fogle-Hatch, and Cheryl Henderson, who is with us at many events, providing the wonderful service of ASL. So thank you. And of course, to Kristi King, who I just hear your voice in my head because I've just heard you on the radio so many times over so many years, and you are a treasure, and we're really honored that you took the time to be with us today.
My pleasure.
Thank you. I also just want to give a quick shout out to, there are so many folks who are behind the scenes who make the magic possible. There's an individual, Topher Bellavia, who has visited the FDR Memorial along with Dr. Cheryl Fogle-Hatch, who has recorded the photos that we've showed today, and just has provided a lot of hands-on assistance for this project and some others. And of course, Kelly Douglas, our incomparable director of communications, and the whole team. Yes, Kelly Palmer, Darian Chamblay. So I want to thank everyone. And if I missed anyone, please know you are very thanked, and our board of directors and advisory board. So we are the FDR Memorial Legacy Committee. I really appreciate those who attended. Thank you, all of you panelists, for taking time so that we could have this public record, because that's part of our mission, is preservation, and we're preserving these stories, the intent, the understanding, so that we can carry this forward and also teach others. So I want to thank you again for being part of this. You want to learn more about us, because we're pretty awesome, as you can see. Check us out on the web, www.fdrmemoriallegacy.com. Kelly just posted our info on the chat room. So I'm going to say goodbye to y'all for now. Hope you have a great rest of the week, great rest of the day, and thanks for spending some time with us.